Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back. We've just heard comments from Matthew Parks, his expectations. Obviously, Matthew Parks is from COSATU, and he has told us what COSATU is expecting in the budget speech today. And of course, I responded by asking, these are our expectations, but is, are those expectations going to be delivered upon? And I guess that is, in fact, the big question. So with much anticipation, we all are standing by as South Africans for the budget speech 2023 by Enoch Godongwana, but we are going to get lots more comment regarding the upcoming budget speech later today. We have another guest online, and that is, of course, you, Dominic Brown. You are with the Alternative Information and Development Center, obviously here in South Africa. We're going to welcome you to the program. Tell us a little bit about the type of work you guys do at the AIDC, and then we'll jump to the heart of the matter, and that, of course, is the Budget Speech 2023. A very good morning. Welcome.
Morning to you and to the viewers. AIDC is a non-profit organization that does research and trainings in support of trade unions and social movements to advance progressive demands. For example, the demand for a basic income grant, the demand for decent work and livelihoods, but also, and very importantly, looking at the problem of climate change and how we can, in fact, address South Africa's unemployment crisis and the problem of climate change simultaneously through a 1 million climate jobs approach.
Okay, so obviously the type of work you're engaged in at the AIDC does mean lots and lots of interaction at government level. Are they open to all of the suggestions, ideas, plans for the future and plans for the people of South Africa from your organization? Do they also assist? Because obviously you can't do it on your own. You need the partnership and the buy-in from government.
Partnerships are key, especially collaborating with a wide range of people with the best of interests. Government, I find, is not homogeneous. There's differences between different government departments. And I find that there's some really good people. For example, there's some people in the Department of Social Development are well-meaning and are trying hard to get government to establish a permanent cash transfer to address the big problem of hunger and precariousness in this country. I think many people feel this problem daily as the cost of living crisis increases, but social grants hasn't increased at the same levels of inflation, and wages haven't increased at the same level of inflation. But then you have other government departments, and I particularly isolate Treasury, who would be behind leading the budget speech today, who often argues that in spite of very well argued and empirical research, that there isn't resources to, for example, implement a basic income grant. And so this raises a bigger question, which is the kind of macroeconomic framework, the policies that guides the overarching way in which government develops its policies and what it allows for within that framework. And I think that's where there's big limitations.
Okay, you talk about an income grant, a social income grant. This is apart from the pensioners' grants, the grants that young girls are getting for for babies, to support their babies and make sure that ECD is instituted from a very young age. A lot of our young girls who are falling pregnant in schools and in the rural areas aren't equipped well enough to deal, or bring up those kids as we'd like them to, in the right environment, and to support them like we'd like them to be supported. There's also the disability grant. There are other politicians that are arguing and I hear what you say, income grants, basic income grants needs to be increased because it's not, it's just not keeping up with inflation. People can't afford to live off those grants. But there are the issues around unemployed youth. There's also talk about, handing out grants to people who are unemployed. Is that the way we ought to be going? Shouldn't government change its mindset and start creating jobs? So the money that they want to grant out to people on for whatever reason, shouldn't that money be used to grow the economy, to get young people into the workplace, and thereby also making them to increase the tax base?
So your instincts are correct. But if we go back to the previous point that I was making, that if we change the way in which we think about the economy, then it doesn't have to be a zero sum game or an either or approach. And in fact, for example, you could expand social protection. So that would be to increase the grants given. And currently, there isn't a basic income grant. There has been the rollout of the social relief of distress grants following the breakout of the pandemic and the introduction of the hard lockdown. That was in 2020. Since then, which it was introduced at 350 Rand, and since then it hasn't increased at all, which means in reality, the 350 Rand is worth possibly 300 Rand in the shops when we go to buy things. Now, given that more than 55% of the population is living on an income of less than 1,335 Rand per month, which is, it's not possible to uh, buy the necessary needs to survive, nor is it possible to, in fact, go out in search for jobs. Then, when we found what we find is that when there's a cash transfer introduced, especially one that's of a more substantial level, for example, up to between the food poverty level and the upper bound poverty level, it has in positive impacts in relation to improving production in society. We will also recoup some of that expenditure through resources, through the increased spending and buying power of more people. But if you couple the injection of a cash transfer to alleviate the deep pressures, social pressures on people, while investing, for example, in a rollout of a proper public transport program, if you think about a housing program, or even decarbonizing the energy system and really investing in fixing ESCOM, for example, as well as investing in more teachers, healthcare workers, and correctional service workers and municipal workers, the things that we need to improve the standard of living in our society. If we do this, we can both address the deep crisis of living while shifting South Africa on a job creating path. Whereas now, what we are seeing is the opposite happening, which is that we're seeing a tokenistic grant being given, insufficient to make a, a significant contribution to people's material needs, along with a big push from government to increasingly privatize energy, transport, and other key sectors of the economy, along with a continued reliance on an export led growth model, which ultimately has resulted in the premature deindustrialization of the South African economy. And this is why we have this massive unemployment crisis. So we have to rethink the economy and invest both in expanding the social net to vulnerable and precarious people, and play a leading role. The state must play a leading role in investing in work opportunities. Of course, in doing so, there needs to be safeguards against corruption. And here we think there are a number of concrete measures that can be implemented as well.
Okay, let's go for an ad break. When we get back, we'll continue this discussion. Thank you indeed.
There's no smell that takes me back to the comfort of my childhood than the smell of blackseed oil being applied by my nanny. Now I'm using tib blackseed in my own home to soothe sniffles and coughs, to help with digestion and immunity, and of course, as part of my beauty routine. After all these years, I've come to appreciate the wisdom in finding comfort and shifa in trusted treatments like tib blackseed. You can find tib blackseed at all leading pharmacies or find out more at blackseed.co.za.
Deadly earthquakes struck Turkey and Syria, leaving communities devastated and in dire need of assistance. Over 8,000 buildings and homes were reduced to rubble. Over 9,000 people have been confirmed dead, with hundreds of thousands seriously injured. Families and communities are in disarray as search and rescue operations continue day and night. Islamic relief teams are on the ground providing vital emergency relief to the affected communities. Your support enables us to provide food, medical care, and emergency shelter. Donate now and help us save lives. Visit www.islamic-relief.org.za.
Ah, the kitchen, the heart of the home, where memories are made and celebrated. Our go-to place for those freshly stacked pancakes early in the morning or for that late-night snack munchies. We are in there together, cooking, eating, and celebrating life together. Let's keep the kitchen a place that is shared by everyone, where we build stronger bonds and grow together. Sunfoil, Now We Cooking. Visit nowwecooking.co.za for recipes that everyone can help make.
When the perfect blend of stylish decor, exquisite halal cuisine, and warm hospitality come together, it could only mean Al Bayt Lodge, your true home away from home. Al Bayt is the ideal heaven for families, business people, and tourists with its 4-star family rooms and other luxurious facilities, conveniently situated close to Port Elizabeth Airport, the beach, and other amenities. Your stay will be truly unforgettable, as you'll be taking home lasting memories of the warm hospitality, the serenity and tranquility that Al Bayt has to offer. For reservations, call 041 583 6415 or visit www.albaytlodge.co.za.
Rejuvenating media day by day. This is Salam Media.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back. The big day has finally dawned upon us. It is Budget Speech Day 2023, and all eyes and ears will be glued, or rather, all eyes will be glued to Enoch Godongwana, and our ears will be open to what he has to say. Are our expectations going to be met? Is it going to be same old, as we've heard in the past, and no progress at all being made in South Africa? We have Dominic Brown from the AIDC, which is the Alternative Information and Development Center, talking to us about his expectations of the Budget Speech 2023. Dominic, I think you've spoken on behalf of South Africans. This is what we're wanting. This is what we're hoping for. Are we going to get what we're expecting? I think that's the $1 million question, is it not?
Yes, I think there will be an extension of the social relief of distress grant, and that's very important. It's unfortunate that they reduced the threshold of the social relief of distress grant, which means that it's about 3 million people who should receive it who's not receiving it. Then I think, so that's good, but there's important work to push for a permanent introduction of a basic income grant. 2, I think that there will be some measures taken to deal with the Eskom's energy crisis. The problem is that the measures taken will be half-baked, in that, in fact, Eskom requires a considerable amount of resources to be able to address the load shedding problem. And in fact, it would be the quickest and, while not cheap, the most affordable way of doing it. I don't think that sufficient resources will be directed to ESCOM. And here we've been arguing as AIDC, the way in which to do it is to tackle ESCOM and government's debt through the use of the Government Employees Pension Fund, which is 110% funded and makes a surplus of 50 billion rand each year. And you can do it.
Can I just come in there? Dominic, isn't that fund bankrupt already?
Oh
Do
no,
we still have money in that fund?
the fund is heavily overfunded. It's one of the
Okay.
biggest pools of finance in the country. It has 2,300 billion rand in accumulated reserves, and so basically, if in
So
an event,
remind me, maybe a year or 24 months ago, there was talk about the government pension fund being, I think people's fingers were in the till as far as that is concerned. And I thought at the time that it was probably all the money was taken out.
No. What happened was so in fact, there is some corruption, but it's actually, and it's all corruption's a problem, but in terms of the bigger scale of corruption in this country, it's fails in comparison. Two, what happened was during the pandemic, and this is where the problem actually lies.
Okay.
During the pandemic, more than 30% of the JSE, dropped in value.
Yes.
30% of the JSE. And the Government Employees Pension Fund, through its asset manager, the Public Investment Corporation, invested and continues to invest more than 2/3 of its accumulated reserves of its assets in the JSE. And because of the volatility of the stock markets, when that crash happened at the time, it meant that the Government Employees Pension Fund took a major hit.
Okay.
However, the stock market ebbs and flows, and because of this volatility, it has drawbacks and positives. So it's now back to where and at higher levels than it was pre the pandemic. The problem, however, is that instead of investing all of this money in equity, in assets, that's often not in the interests of the pensioners and the beneficiaries of the pension fund, for example, in Sasol or in other big mining companies, as opposed to investing those resources into job creating opportunities. For example, creating a new renewable energy economy or the space to do so. And this is where, and we must recognize that already more than 20% of ESCOM's liabilities. So ESCOM has 390 billion rand in debt, more than 80 billion is owed to the Government Employees Pension Fund. And it pays a huge amount of interest on that each year. And this year, the Government Employees Pension Fund came to its senses and said, we're not going to ask you to pay your 13 billion rand in debt repayments this year. We'll wait until you're in a better financial position, given that we are flush. And it's almost like when you have a family member in crisis and you have a rich auntie or uncle, and they say, no, we'll give you a little bit of money to tide yourself over at least. And when you're ready, you can pay us back. And that's what you can do, really.
Okay, so obviously government has to come to the party as far as this issue is concerned. Again, one needs to look out for corrupt practices once that money does, is released to the different entities or is invested in different areas, or perhaps also to ESCOM itself. But I think people are very wary about the ESCOM situation because it seems that their situation is they're just getting deeper and deeper and deeper. I won't say into the red, but into the black hole of darkness. Excuse the pun. You talk about you've
something on this.
Yes, go ahead.
Look, corruption is a big problem and it's becoming an increasing problem in this country. And there's a number of ways in which corruption can unfold. And corruption is also rife in the private sector. So African private sector is actually rated as amongst the most corrupt in the world. It's a serious problem. But we need public disclosure of contractual information so that they can be held for public scrutiny and greater levels of accountability. We should be insourcing as opposed to outsourcing key components of service delivery, including, for example, the maintenance of ESCOM. And we pay exorbitant fees to outsourced uh, uh, firms. And then I would like us, it's probably a longer conversation, but I think it's important that we see that while corruption has exacerbated many problems in this country, most of these problems come about due to years, decades of bad policy choices. This includes, for example, what's happening at ESCOM, which is in fact by design. So if we go back to 1998, there was a white paper on energy which placed a moratorium on ESCOM building any new generative capacity, in spite of ESCOM saying that this would lead to problems down the line as demand will exceed supply, resulting in the kind of rolling blackouts, load shedding we're seeing today. They also implemented a financing model based on the corporatization of ESCOM, which required ESCOM to raise the majority of its revenue, its resources, through tariffs and debts, as opposed to sufficient state resources. The implication is that given that so many people in this country are unable to afford electricity, in and amongst other factors like rising debt costs following the build of Medupi and Kusile, debt taken in foreign currency, what you see is that ESCOM, in fact, is unable to recover sufficient revenues to meet its operational costs, debt service costs, maintenance, and investment. Subsequently to that, we see over the past 5-10 years, major budget cuts to not only infrastructure, key infrastructure, municipal infrastructure, education infrastructure, health infrastructure, other key spendings. And so the crisis we're seeing in SOEs and in ESCOM, in fact, is not mainly due to corrupt practices or bad people. It's an unsustainable financing model. And so unless you address this, you will invariably see the problems that's arising, including the need for ESCOM to call for massive tariff hikes. It's important to acknowledge and recognize that even the tariff hikes that's being requested by ESCOM is not full cost reflective tariffs. It doesn't cover all the costs for ESCOM. And they are
However,
pushing.
I need to come in there. It's not affordable to you and I and the unemployed person in the street. So those tariff hikes are not going to work in South Africa. We're going to, there's going to be protest action if there are any more. As it is, we're talking about the 18% that NERSA has agreed.
Approved.
Yeah, it's just not, people are not going to be able to afford it. So that is an issue that they need to apply their minds to. And
so there's some ideas here.
Yes.
So there's the primary energy costs of ESCOM. So in the primary energy costs, the major ones are coal, IPP contracts, and diesel. Now, just with diesel, if government grants ESCOM tax exemption status, the licensing to procure the diesel that's needed to run the open gas cycle turbines, which reduces load shedding by 2 stages, it can reduce the cost by 6 Rand per litre, saving approximately 1 billion Rand just till the end of ESCOM's financial year in March. There's also massive growth in or rise in the costs of IPP contracts. And if we renegotiate the purchase power agreements, for example, of bid windows 1 to 4 of the IPP contracts, we can significantly reduce those costs too. And in
Dominic, I'm
three,
going to have to stop you there. We're running out of time, but it is these issues that you're raising are very, very important. I probably will pick up with you in about a month's time on another show, really, and we'll go into it in depth. I just want to make one comment regarding the diesel issue. We do know that diesel comes at a huge cost. Already, we're hearing that state hospitals, are running out of diesel and running out of funds for diesel because it's very, very costly. But what are the Greenpeace people or the the climate change people going to say about it? Because burning of the diesel is going to create an issue around climate change, is it not? So a short, sharp answer to that. I also want you to very quickly outline, you keep talking about the basic income grant. We have other grants that have already been implemented, been running for a couple of years. Is this over and above those grants? What do they look like? Whom are they targeted at? And my third, all right, respond to those two questions, and I have one more question for you.
Okay. So one, I spoke a lot about things that requires money. So there are resources that are available, not only the government employees pension fund. Research shows that a small wealth tax on the top 1% of people in the country of between 3 and 7%, a progressive net wealth tax of between 3 and 7% raises 140 billion rand. Okay. And there's a number of
bracket are we looking at here? What
so
bracket?
this is the top
The
1%
earning brackets.
No, they're not income.
Billionaires. You're
They are
talking about billionaires. Yeah.
billionaires. They are the big wealthy people of the
Okay.
of the country. Though there's 35,000 of them, and they have the same amount of wealth as the 32 million poorest people in this country. So a small 3 to 7% wealth tax on them raises 140 billion rand a year.
But
So
do you
yes,
think they'd agree to it? They're going to push back. They're going to push back very hard.
but that doesn't mean we mustn't push back harder. And then, yes, the basic income grant, it would be over and above the current old age pension, child support, and foster grants. And it would be, in fact, expanding the social relief of distress grant and making it, implementing it on a permanent basis. And this would be directed as a cash transfer to people aged 18 to 59. And there's a number of examples where this has been done at case studies levels in practice and during the pandemic. And the positive impacts are overwhelming. And then in terms of the diesel, firstly, I will say this. The problem that hospitals don't have enough money to operate effectively is an issue. The same applies to schools. What's behind this is years and years of budget cuts, an austerity agenda that is really bringing our country to collapse. So that's a big problem. And we really need to push for the ending of budget cuts and austerity. Yes, over the long term, we can't continue to burn fossil fuels. We need to move as quickly as possible to a low carbon, to a renewable energy economy that at the same time deals with people's socioeconomic needs. However, if you're going to choose between running the diesel or not, you're effectively choosing between keeping lives or not at this stage. Because if you don't run the diesel, people may die as a result of the hospital not operating, or people could get more sick. So I think in the short and interim term, it's by necessity that we have to do this, whilst acknowledging, of course, that it's not an indefinite solution. It's the unfortunate situation that we find ourselves in at the moment.
Okay, coming back to the basic income grant, and I do agree 101% that the pensioners fund needs to increase to at least 2,000 Rand, if not more. Child support as well. What can you do with 350 Rand? The disability grant as well needs to be increased. But this basic income grant, should it not be put into a fund, let great minds come together and start creating employment opportunities for young people. We know that our infrastructure right across the board is crumbling. So get these young people to work. Let them fill potholes. Let them start fixing hospitals. Let them start fixing schools. Put the money to better use. And that money will definitely turn around and give people, young people, skills and a sense of dignity in, earning money rather than being given a handout. Finally, Freedom Front Plus spokesperson Wouter Wessels has echoed the need for addressing Eskom's dire financial position. You've spoken about it at length. But he goes on to say that all luxuries must be cut from the economy. I want you to expand on that. What is he referring to there? Is it luxuries for politicians, ministers, etc.? He also talks about growing, and also he goes on to say that departments can't be given more money to squander. So I guess he is referring to politicians and ministers, etc. He goes on to say that every single cent must be used to stimulate the economy, grow businesses, and create jobs. Just exactly what I said about the basic income grant. Your thoughts? How can we go about doing this?
So the basic income grant and a cash transfer can in fact and often does help to increase productivity. But more importantly, I think many of us would agree it's inhumane for people to be starving. And there's 10 million people who are starving each and every week. 3 million are children. And if we can provide something to protect people from deep levels of hunger and precarity, I think it's important that we do it. And that doesn't negate or preclude us from doing and enrolling a job guarantee program through the expanded public works and making it a permanent and decent kind of work where you're contributing to improving the standards of living in our communities. And there's many people from our experience who are really keen to work. They're saying we need a basic income grant because the government hasn't made jobs. And in the process of creating jobs, we need this kind of support. But we want to work. People want to work for the exact reason you're saying. They want a life that where they're contributing to the improvement of our society. I think that on the point of the Freedom Front Plus, going back to earlier on, the very, very wealthy people in this country spend money on they have conspicuous lifestyles where they are consuming things that's beyond imagination. They don't know what to do with their money, buying yachts and the most fanciest of cars, big properties, jewelry, paintings, real estate. This kind of spending should definitely be capped, and in part also redistribute this wealth, as I was saying earlier on, through some kind of wealth tax on the very wealthy in this country. That's not even on income.
Dominic, that's all we have time for. Thank you so very much for being on the show this morning. Loved chatting with you. That, of course, was Dominic Brown, Alternative Information and Development Center. His thoughts and expectations on the budget and going forward as South Africans, what can we do to turn our situation around? Obviously, in light of the budget speech 2023, which is happening sometime this morning. The time is 8:51 a.m. We're going to go for an ad break, and then we will be joined by Asma Mullah, Lens Art Expo coordinator.